My name is Jennifer, and I will be one of the moderators for today. And I would also like to allow the other two moderators to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lizzie. I am one of the co-chairs of Outreach Committee of CURB, and we're so excited to bring this event to you today.
Hi guys, I'm Sam. I'm a member of CURB's Outreach Committee, and thank you guys all so much for coming.
Okay, so tonight we're joined by a group of current graduate students who will be answering some frequently asked questions about resume, and then also later in breakout rooms will help you improve your resume. So now I'll pass it off to Lizzie to describe what this event is all about.
Yes, so the event will be split up into two parts. The first 30 minutes will be a Q&A with all of the grad students, and this is just frequently asked questions about resumes. And in the second section, we will also be splitting you up into breakout rooms with a graduate student. So if you have specific questions, you can save those for the breakout rooms so that you can actually get answers one-on-one and directly. If you are also comfortable, you can pull up your own resume to ask even more specific questions. And that way the grad students in each room can address them. The first half will be recorded and posted on the CURB's YouTube channel. So feel free to check it out later after the event to refer back to. And now we're going to have our panelists briefly introduce themselves with their name, year, and field of study.
Hi everyone, I'm Jen and I am a third year PhD candidate in ecology and evolutionary biology.
Hi, I'm Sarah and I'm a third year in biochemistry, cell and molecular biology, also a PhD student.
I'm Janessa, currently a third year PhD student in computer science.
I'm Sam, I'm a second year PhD student in ecology and evolutionary biology.
Hi, I'm Margaret Pacheco. I'm a second year in the biomedical engineering PhD program.
Hi, I'm Sumya Basu. I'm a sixth year in the computer science PhD program.
Hi everyone, I'm Freddie. I'm a first year in the genetics genomics development program. I didn't know we weren't using acronyms. My bad.
Okay, I think our last panelist wasn't able to make it for today, but no worries. We still have a very good number of graduate students here. So now we can move on into the Q&A part of this workshop. So let's start with Sam introducing our first question.
Great, so our first question for our panelists is just going to be, what is the difference between a resume and a CV?
We can start with Sam answering.
Yeah, hi. This is a really good question because I think in like the business worlds and maybe if your friends are not in STEM or if you're not in STEM, they probably use the word resume, which is usually a 1 to 2 page document that's shorter than a CV and is really selling yourself to for a job. A CV is also doing that, but CV is Latin. It stands for curriculum vitae, which is like the story of your life. So it's much longer, often many pages, and it basically lists absolutely everything you've ever done, every presentation you've had, every publication you've had, every, lots of different things. People list classes if they're relevant. Sometimes they list professional outreach opportunities. Yeah, so that's the main difference, I think.
Margaret, you can feel free to add anything onto that if you'd like.
Yeah, I only have a small thing to add is that like because resumes are shortened to that 1 or 2 pages, I think it gets tailored and changed way more depending on the job that you're going for. Whereas like your life story, like it changes, but like probably not that much. And so I think it's just broader and you like don't change it as drastically as you would change your resume.
Great, let's go on to our next question. So our next question is, what is the ideal length for a resume, specifically for undergraduates applying to graduate school?
We can start with Sarah.
Yeah, so typically a lot of, at least applications for grad school as I applied for, asked for a 1-page resume. So just one sheet. Sometimes it was 1 to 2 pages. So you could go over, but typically it's just 1 page.
And I would also say the same as from if I remember mine was 1 page as well. I didn't have a CV until I went to grad school.
Freddie, oh, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. Yeah,
Oh,
Marguerite.
sorry, I was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So the third question is, should I include experiences that are not related to the field I am applying to?
We can start with Marguerite if you had an answer for this one question too.
Yeah, I just have very strong feelings about this, and the answer is yes, simply because you learn a lot of things from fields that are not the one that you're applying to now. One of the biggest pieces of advice I got for my personal statement, which like also the rationale is the same, but for my personal statement was like, until I settled on my subfield within biomedical engineering, I had done a bunch of stuff in like evolutionary bio. I had done some stuff in developmental bio. I had done stuff within soccer training, like sports training world stuff. And all of that stuff was useful, even though it didn't end up being what I ended up, like the field that I ended up going into. And it was useful because of like, not only the specific, I don't know, information it taught me, but how that field taught you to think, how it showed you how to analyze problems within a completely different field is very useful. A lot of our world is now cross-disciplinary. And so like having skills from other fields that somebody in the field that you're going into would never think of is actually really helpful. Also, it can kind of like show that like, yeah, I tried all this other stuff. Now I know that I definitely want to do this, rather than, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, which is also fine, but like, I don't really know what I'm doing, so I'm just picking this. Showing that you've tried other things and settled on something else can also be kind of like a plus with your application.
Sumya, you can add on to that.
Yeah, I agree with Maggie on what she said. So for grad school applications, you're mostly looking, this is specifically for PhD, you're mostly looking at how strong they will be, how strong the applicant will be as a researcher. So even if you did research in a different field, it still tells you something about like how that person thinks and so on, like similar to what Maggie said. So like for sure, like experiences that are not related but add to your sort of research outlook and everything is extremely valuable to include.
Yeah, perfect. Freddie, you can also answer.
Yeah, I would echo everything that the other two panelists have said so far. I would also say that, so for my resume, I actually have a small section on like extracurriculars, and like one of them I put was I was like a resident advisor. I don't know what you guys call them here at Cornell, but I was a resident advisor as an undergrad, and I have a little blurb about that just because it's like one, it's not always the most common thing that people put on their resumes when they're applying to grad school. So it's like, oh, it's interesting, but also you can demonstrate that you have different kind of soft skills as well for that too. So like communication skills or teamwork skills are also equally important in grad school. So it's a nice way to show that you've had experience with those things rather than having to try to describe them through something else.
Ryan, you can go next.
Yeah, I agree with everyone. I just wanted to add to be careful with this though, and don't go overboard, especially if you're limited on space. I think that it's really easy for admissions committees to see the people who are like overcommitted and just put everything on their resume to look like they've done everything possible. I think it's more valuable to, yes, include these experiences, but only if it's something that you have enough experience with that you could talk extensively about. Like if like you should be able to carry on a conversation about this topic. It shouldn't just, don't list every club you've ever gone to a meeting of.
Jen, you can go next.
Yeah, I'll just go off of Ryan's point, but also when you're listing these experiences, any kind of research or presentations or anything like that, make sure that you list specifically what you did as maybe as like a sub bullet point under it, rather than just giving the broad overarching research question. It's really important to identify that, you know, you were in charge of the DNA extractions or you had experience with analyses, because that way it really targets what parts of the project that you were a part of and what experience, because you don't want to get to an interview and then be asked about a part of the project that you had nothing to do with. So that's also something to keep in mind.
Great, I think we can move on to our next question then. So the next question is, should my resume be formatted chronologically or by type of experience?
Sarah, you can answer first.
Yeah, so typically for my resume, I break it into like type of experience. So I have a section for education, I have a section for, you know, work experience, I have a section for volunteering. And within each of those, I will order them either chronologically if there are a whole bunch of them, or sometimes by importance. So if there's one that like I did for, you know, 4 years, I might list that one first, even if I started another one before that that I only did for a year.
Shanasa, you can answer next.
Yeah, I was pretty much going to say the same thing. It's technically both. So I have the categories, and then within the categories, I format them chronologically. So
Ryan, you can add on to that.
I actually don't think it matters. I think it should be clear and concise, and you have to imagine that the reviewers are going to be looking through up to 50 different applications, complete applications, not just resumes or CVs. And so it's whatever works best for your experiences, and however it fits well together, that when you read through the page, you can kind of get a picture of like what this person has done.
Shanasa?
and when I guess adding back on to that, I think it definitely, you know, for grad school, would be helpful to have obviously education and research experience a little bit higher in regards to you know, things like work experience or activities. And so that's one thing I would suggest as well.
Great. Okay, let's move on to our next question. So our next question is, what are some important tips to keep in mind when describing my experiences on a resume?
Sam, you can start.
Yeah, I think this is something that I struggle with, and I think a lot of people struggle with, but a resume or a CV is not a time to be modest. Of course, you don't want to, you know, come across as like generally in life as like a braggart or as, you know, someone who's always talking about how awesome they are. But this is your one time in your life where it is your, maybe this or like applying to a job or something, is like when you have to sell yourself. Like you're trying to make a committee who's never met you read some pieces of paper, some documents you prepared, and understand who you are as a story and why their graduate program or their, even for a job, their job, that company cannot exist. They can't survive if they don't hire you or take you on as a student. So definitely just sell yourself.
Freddie, you can go next.
Yeah, I would. I also, this is something that I struggle with, but it's definitely something that's important. Is use active voice. So rather than a sentence, I have modeled. Say I modeled. On the one hand, it will save you space and make your statements read more smoothly rather than having, you know, haves and woulds and stuff. But also subtly, from like a psychology perspective, it has an effect on the reader that this is something that you have definitely done and is like very clear. So when they're reading your statement, they know exactly who you are and what you did.
Marguerite, you can add on to that.
Yeah, I would also say, so like, yes to both of those things. Like definitely, for me personally, it was super hard to like, I guess, brag and use active voice, or say things like, oh, I was a part of this. I would say that no matter what, even if I was the one leading it, just out of habit. Like really make sure that like, if you did that work, then you did that work, no qualifiers. if you're on a team, don't say that like, and you weren't the leader, like don't say that you're leading. That's just a lie. But you know, if you did something, you did something, and put it down. But in terms of describing your experiences, make sure that I forget who said this, but somebody said like write down like kind of specifics about like what you did. Also, if like you did a bunch of things, maybe put first the skill or the technique or the analysis or like job requirement that you had that's useful to that program. So like you should be tailoring your resume to each program. Probably only like little bits here and there, but like definitely like when you're describing your experiences, put the parts that they will care about most first. Because I mean, like they are going through many of these. If it is in the first line, it is very easy to see.
Sarah, you can go next.
One other important thing though is your word choice. So make sure you use like really active verbs to describe what you're doing. So I mean, they're going to read, 100 resumes that say I researched this topic. So like researched is, very general. It's much more impactful if you can say like I developed this technique or I investigated this question or just make sure that you use verbs that are really descriptive of what you've actually done and not just like generic bland word choice.
Oh, Ryan, you can go next.
I think one thing to keep in mind too is that they're really, well, I guess, and this might be more specific to graduate school and completely the opposite for applying to jobs and stuff, but I think that they're really trying to understand like what you know and that you can communicate what you know. And so like how you think about science, for example, which is my field, they want to know that you understand the bigger picture of what you're researching more so than what techniques exactly you have experience with, because everybody's going to have different techniques, and they're looking for candidates that are going to fit in a program and could go to many different different fields within that department. So I think that's just an important thing to keep in mind, is how you describe things could communicate how well you understand what you are doing.
Freddie, you can add on to that.
I would also add that you can get a little creative with how you present your experiences. So it doesn't have to just be like a giant block of text, especially if it's a big block of text on a resume. People might not even finish reading it. So if you can get it across in bullet points or something, or there's a small list within your blurb about your experience or something, just it can be more visually appealing and also catch their attention so that they get the message of 1, 2, 3 bullet points or something of what you got from this experience.
Okay, so the next question is it inappropriate to still have experiences from high school on my resume? Should everything included just be from my undergraduate years?
Chinasa, you can start.
Oh, oops. Yeah. So I definitely think that it's okay, especially within your first 2 years or so. But anytime after that, maybe even like after maybe like the first semester point of your second year, then you should probably stop including stuff from undergrad. Is except for, I don't know if it's like happens to be super relevant. Like maybe you did a very cool, research program at NASA or like at a top university. That could also help you get into RU programs or other like summer experiences. So it really depends, but definitely not past like junior year.
Sarah, you can go next.
Yeah, I sort of agree. I typically, because of the space constraint, it is more beneficial to take experiences that are more recent and expand on what skills you gained and what you learned and what you did there than it is to, throw back to something you did maybe your freshman year of high school, your sophomore year of high school. So typically the more recent, the better. But I mean, if you've done something really cool, I don't think you should feel like there's like a time cutoff that you absolutely cannot include anything from before, college. I don't think that that's necessary.
Sumya, you can go next.
Yeah, I think echoing what was said before, mostly what I do is like when as I add new experiences, I'll take out the least important slash relevant ones. And those tend to be chronologically further back as well. So like it'll just, for me, this just kind of happened naturally as I did more stuff in college. And I think what Shanasa mentioned earlier, where like after like my sophomore, junior year-ish is when like my stuff from high school kind of just all filtered out of my resume. But that's usually how I kind of think about whether I put a certain experience on my resume or not.
Sam, you can add on to that.
Yeah, I just want to say that I remember when I eventually, like around my junior year, when I kind of revamped my resume and I took off my high school experiences, I was really anxious about it because my resume went from having like everything I did freshman and sophomore year and from high school to just stuff I did in college. Not that it necessarily you need to work on a resume like that, but that's how I did it. But I would just like everyone to remember that whenever you're applying for something, they're not just looking at what you did, they're looking at like where you are in your academic career. So like if you're a junior in college and you have, you know, like a 1-page resume or CV, like that's totally fine because by the time you're in your second year of grad school, it's going to be a lot longer just because you've had more time in the field to do more things. So like don't be self-conscious that you don't have as much on your resume because you took stuff off from high school.
Great, so I think we can move on to our next question. And that's going to be, what are some formatting tips to make my resume appear organized and easy to read?
Marguerite, you can start.
Okay, I think that just first, headers and subheaders is just like very simple to have. Like somebody saying like research, academic, outreach, I don't know, like other soft skills, other like experiences you've had. Okay, I'm also gonna say something that might be controversial. I don't know how y'all feel about this. I'm definitely quite comfortable like bolding things. Like either the first line or like something like, for me, bolding things make all for bolding to like visually organize things as well. Like, you know, like a first line of something, or just something like that. I think that visually organizing things in that way is helpful as well. Not having boring headers, like a difference in size, like a slightly different, like an underline, something. I think that that makes it easier, and it's kind of, I guess, easier to see like what you're prioritizing and stuff. I don't know how other people feel about bolding and that kind of stuff.
Sarah, you can go next.
Yeah, I think also just consistency. So whatever you choose to do, just be really consistent about it. If you choose to bold like the first header and then do like sub bullet points and always separate, you know, time after title or something, just do that all the way through, because that way, you know, it takes whoever's reading it the first section to sort of figure out what you've done, and then it's easy for them to kind of glance over the rest of your resume and understand how you've organized it.
Jen, you can go next.
Yeah, I'd say don't be afraid of white space. It helps the reader, like instead of having everything as single spaced with bullet points, using white space. What I do is I actually have a line that goes the whole way across the page that cuts up the sections so that it's easy to find the next header. And I agree, I love bold, and consistency is great. And I know it's boring, but you want to stick with black font rather than a fancy, you know, my favorite color is purple, but I don't have purple font. And then also just from, if you guys ever do a presentation, like a poster presentation, or you give a talk or something, and you have lots of different people listed as co-authors, you want to make sure that you bold your name so that it's really easy to find it. So that's something very specific to STEM, but if you give a presentation in a class that's relevant, make sure that you bold your name.
Freddie, you can go next.
A lot of my points have already been taken by other people, so it's very good that we all agree. One thing that I would suggest too is printing out copies of your resume as you're working on it, and then holding it not from like arm's length basically, and just seeing like where your eye is drawn to first. if it's like there's this huge block of white space or something, then maybe, reshape how that is organized, or if you've bolded something, if your eye's drawn to that first. Because usually when you hand someone a resume or they print out your resume, something's going to catch their attention first, and that's usually what they're going to remember is the first thing they see. So it's a good idea to make sure that's whatever is the first impression is something that you really want them to take away from your resume.
Simi, you can add on to that.
Yeah, I think all of the other panelists said like most of the like tips I would give. One thing that I did for formatting my resume, because a lot of this was hard for me to follow, was like keeping everything in mind was pretty hard. Was I just took a template online, and basically from there I incorporated the tips like bolding certain things, like printing it out and making sure it looks okay, like basically everything the other panelists said. But having like that first framework just made it really easy for me, who's like terrible at starting with like a blank slate, to just do it. But I think, yeah.
Jen, you can go next.
Sorry, yeah, that statement reminded me of what I did. So when it's, at least in STEM, when you apply to graduate schools, you'll actually have to send a CV in an email to a potential professor that you're going to work with that would be your advisor before you even apply to the graduate school. So what I did was I got onto the website of a couple professors that I was looking to work with, and I actually looked at the way they formatted their CVs. So there's lots of different ways to pull formats online.
Great. Let's move on to the next question. This will be our last question before we move on to breakout rooms, so it's exciting. So question 8, should I have a different resume for every school or program that I apply to?
Sarah, you can start.
Yeah, so I think that you don't need a different one necessarily, but certain schools will ask for specific things. Like I had a general resume that I submitted to every school, but I remember one of the schools that I applied to is like, they asked specifically for the name of my program and the year I graduated to be at the very top of my resume. So I had to make a minor edit and submit a specific one to that. So some schools will have specific things they want you to do. And then if, a certain school has a certain value or something, like one of the schools that I applied to had a really good like biomedical program, and they had a med school on their campus, so I bumped my like EMT experience up higher on my resume than it was for other schools that where maybe like the medical aspect didn't matter quite as much. So just minor edits, but I think that the content should be relatively the same.
Sumya, you can go next.
Yeah, I think I think I concur with what was said before. Like I think you should have basically the same resume. You make minor edits for each school and program. One thing is like, I'm not sure how you'd want to do it if you were applying to like 2 different programs, because so sometimes if you're in interdisciplinary, you might be applying to like in my area, like computer science for some schools, and other schools might be applying to electrical engineering. And then that might change up your resume for like change up the order of things and so on. But in general, you should probably have one resume. And I think I've kept my resume on my website. So it's been consistent all throughout.
Sam, you can go next.
Yeah, I can actually speak to applying to different programs. In undergrad, I did research on evolutionary biology of deep sea corals and also on microbiomes. And I didn't really care what I worked on in grad school because I was kind of just interested in molecular evolution. So I applied to labs that worked on deep sea biology and labs that worked on microbiology. And the way that I changed my resume was kind of similar to what other people have been saying, where not only did I switch to order, but I also really beefed up like my like microbiology experience for the microbiome programs I applied to, and I really played up my field work in like the Gulf of Mexico and like doing coral research for the marine biology programs I applied to. of course, I had all those experiences on both my resumes because even I'm studying microbiomes now, and even my marine biology experiments is relevant in some way to me being a microbiome scientist now.
Marguerite, you can go next.
Yeah, so just a thing about like changing it with different programs and like what each program requires. You can also like take things, I would say, like off or shorten on your resume depending on what the program requires. So like some schools will require a diversity statement. So ironic considering some of the schools that require it. But so if they require that and like extra outreach stuff, and they're gonna ask you to write like an entire statement about it, then it's like those extra 3 lines on your resume, like just get rid of them, like put very brief like words about it so that it's on it, but then like save that space for something else if you're going to be writing like a whole 2 pages on it for a completely different part of the application. So if they're requiring extra parts, then like don't, like you can shorten that on your CV and resume.
Great. Thank you guys for the input for this panel section.